Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I am so excited because I have my friend Liv Ron here today, who is a registered dietitian. She is a PhD candidate and she's a meat scientist, which I can't wait to have you talk about this because I feel like a lot of people talk to me and ask me about, they say they're trying to get healthy and they automatically think they need to be like vegan or vegetarian because they just assume meat is bad for them. But I know Liv is going to kind of give us the facts about is that true? If not, what are we supposed to look for? But before we do that, Liv, please welcome to the podcast. Introduce yourself. Please say who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Hello, and thank you again so much for having me on this podcast. I am so excited to be here with you. So, like Tony said, I am Livi Ron. I am a PhD candidate, registered dietitian. What I do, I work primarily with people just trying to get a real understanding of how to best fuel their bodies. I'm a competitive weightlifter, so I work with a lot of athletes, really learning how to go from a place of being under recovered, not really feeling good in the gym and outside of the gym, and really helping them to just get a good handle on how to best fuel their bodies. I work primarily with women. I do have some male clients, but a lot more with women. And then that's kind of what I do on the side. And then full time, I am a meat scientist. My full time job, I work in technical sales for a large chemical company. We work and sell large scale ingredients to big manufacturers that make, the common names that you would see in the grocery store to make things like hot dogs, deli meats, even some, like minimally processed meats. So we can get into what defines a processed meat, but even things like pork chops and things like that, some of those companies will also use our ingredients. And so I go to these large producers and help them formulate or basically make the large recipe for these like several 1,000-pound mixes of product and how to commercialize those so that they're safe and in your, for consumers to eat and available to you guys in the grocery store.
Wow, that's so interesting. Now, did you kind of just fall upon this, or did you seek out this career path?
So the whole thing is very interesting. So I originally went to college because I wanted to be a veterinarian because I've grown up riding horses and I've always loved horses. And I started applying to vet schools, and I started realizing how expensive going to vet school is going to be, and how the starting salary for most vets is not very great, and you have to pay a lot of money to go to vet school. And I actually was starting to get more and more passionate about food and where our food comes from and large scale food manufacturing, that I decided to totally switch paths and pursued a degree in meat science in grad school. And that's after that, I was also really, really interested in, okay, I know all this about meat. I know so much about how our food is made. Now I want to know about how our bodies utilize this food. And so then I was like, I'm going to go be an RD.
Yeah.
So I kind of tacked that on at the end.
Yeah. And then when did you get into competitive weightlifting?
So I've been an athlete my whole life. I've always been in a variety of different sports. I was in tons of different college sports. And then after college, it was kind of hard to be oh, well, now what? And so in 2013, when I finished undergrad, or 2012, when I finished undergrad, I started doing CrossFit a little bit. And I was like, this is fun and kind of cool. But I really just like this weightlifting component. And so I would say 2013, 2014, I really switched over to just weightlifting.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really, really cool. Okay, so let's talk about meat. I have a couple questions that people usually come to me with, and I think it would just be good. I don't think a lot of people are clear about the definitions because I know that with labeling, some things they have to go through a testing to be actually use that label, and then other things they can just freely use it.
Sure.
So the biggest thing that I hear with people that eat meats is they'll only eat it if it's grass fed.
Sure.
Can you talk maybe the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed, and if like that is something people should be looking for?
Sure. So one of the things that's really important is all cattle that we get here domestically, and everything will say country of origin labeling or cool labeling has to be listed. So if it's not from the United States, it has to be labeled on there. But all domestic animals that we get here in the United States, unless it says Mexico, product of Mexico or whatever, all of them eat grass. All cattle eat grass a majority of their life. It's really only the last 90 or so days of their life they're really exposed to grain. And there's typically no true differences in the way that we raise those animals, in the way that we slaughter those animals. So in terms of animal welfare, there's really no difference, especially when, like I said, all cattle eat grass, and especially because cattle have such long lifespans, like it takes a long time for them to reach full mature weight, typically 16 to 18 months, that we, it's not like chicken where you can raise a full-size chicken in 120 days.
Mm-hmm.
We have to actually wait over a year for a cattle to reach full maturity. So we have different lifestyle stages. So we have cow-calf, so where they're born in calves. There's stocker cattle, where cattle live pretty much a majority of their life. That's when you're driving through rural New York, and you randomly see cows on the side of the road in the field. Primarily those are stocker cattle, where we're just kind of waiting for them to grow to kind of get to the finishing stage, which is that last 90 or so days of their life where we actually put them on grain. So all cattle, because of their long life cycle, have to be on some sort of grass a majority of their life. And, it's sad because the internet is all over the place for talking about these nutritional benefits of grass-fed cattle, but there's actually been tons of research at Texas Tech University and Texas A&M, both universities that I went to, that have published research that actually compares, the effects of ground beef from grass-fed cattle and conventional cattle, and the implications of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And it was found that, there was actually no significant difference in either. And, a lot of people really say we really want omega-3s. I heard there's higher omega-3s in grass-fed animals. But the thing is when you look at in this same size, which is 4-ounce serving of grass-fed beef or grain-fed beef, the amount of omega-3 acid in grass-fed beef is 0.055 grams, or in grain-fed beef is 0.020 grams, in comparison to, salmon or something that has 6 or 7 times that. So it's just not really a source of omega-3s to begin with. So whenever it says I really want omega-3s, well, beef in general should never be your source of omega-3s.
Yeah.
As well as typically grass-fed animals typically are higher in saturated fats than grain-fed animals. And so that also kind of shows that it's kind of extrapolated the data to, and I think a lot of the issues come from the idea that, they're eating grass, they must be treated better, they must be more humane. This is kind of in my mind, what I think cattle should be doing or how they should be raised. And it's really hard when you have these people that really don't know anything about, one, the digestive system of ruminants, cattle are ruminants, don't know anything about how to raise livestock, especially on a large commercial scale. We have 9 billion people in the world. Think about feeding 9 billion people and the requirements it takes to feed that many people. And we live in these small little bubbles, right? Especially people who have enough money to feed themselves, that they're I want to, just eat this, and I want to be able to, and that's it. But you don't think what about all these people who can't afford that? And all these kind of natural labels, organic, grass-fed this, grass-fed that, is actually increasing the overall price of food. Because, for example, normal cost of food, because like I said, all cattle is grass-fed. So now putting that claim on a lot of food is increasing the price. So now people who maybe weren't able to afford, beef, which is actually super nutritious for us, super high in B12, zinc, and iron, maybe can't afford that anymore because now these claims are being put on there, and which is increasing the price. Okay. So there's global impacts of using this, as well as grass-fed beef is not as sustainable for our environment, because if you take those last 3 or so months, whether it's cattle or on grain, they exponentially gain weight. Think about if you lived your whole life on grain, or if you lived your whole life on lettuce, you're going to gain some more weight on grain. And so if we have to extend the amount of time that animal is alive, you think about it, that's more water, more resources, more food, and more methane gas produced. So if we are shortening the time that the animal is alive, the less resources we need. We're actually producing the least amount of cattle ever since 1954, yet we're producing 80% more beef than ever. So we're able to use these different technologies and feeding systems to actually produce more beef with less animals, therefore using less resources. And so actually using these technologies like grain feeding, and in beef specifically using hormones, that actually helps us to raise more animals in a shorter period of time. And I said hormones, a lot of people get really scared about that. But at the same time, you have to remember, we're administering hormones only to cattle. We're not allowed to use hormones in pork or poultry. And anything that you give an animal, whether it's an antibiotic, a hormone, any exogenous, anything, it has to have a USDA withdrawal period. So you mark when that animal is administered anything, then every single animal has to get put through a withdrawal period that is stated by, the maker of that will show that it has less than 1 per billion parts in the final product. So all the carcasses are tested for antibiotic residue as well as hormone residue. And if there's anything in there, it gets pulled. We also have to remember that all living beings are going to contain some sort of hormone. Even if it's a hormone-free product, that animal was once alive, it is going to have hormones, regardless we add them or not.
So this is slightly off topic, but I know that you have the answer because you're an RD and you're brilliant. So the other thing that just came to me is a lot of people that are diagnosed with PCOS say that they don't want to eat meat because they want to be lower in hormones because it's a hormonal disorder. So they assume that then, I guess, and then also too, people who just like overtrain, their hormones get out of whack. I guess if someone comes to you, and I don't know if you get people's blood work, I'm sure like their hormones are altered or whatever, what do you tell them is the cause to that? And then how do they fix it?
So a lot of women come to me. Personally, I even had Hashimoto's. I have a lot of women that come to me with Hashimoto's and more thyroid type symptoms. I do have some women with PCOS. And, when it comes down to that, when we ingest hormones, right, we have to also think that hormone is such a broad term. And it could mean multiple different things. We also have to understand that hormones that are found in animals or milk are not human hormones, right? So they are not impacting us in the same way, as well as the amount of hormone that is in, let's say a 6-ounce serving of whatever is not going to impact our hormonal profile. That is not how that works, especially because if you just think about basic digestion and what's going on in our stomach and the acidic profile of our stomach, any sort of enzyme that would be working on that hormone itself is denatured. So you have nothing that's active that's going to impact you in terms of PCOS, Hashimoto's, or thyroid issues because of a hormone that's it's found in any sort of meat or soy or anything like that. No real issue there.
Okay. Yeah, no, I had to feel like someone was definitely thinking that, and we just answered it for them.
And those things are caused by things outside of, usually, are you training too much? Are you not getting enough sleep? Are you not, eating enough in general? How's your stress? Like a lot of people, in general, your food quality, is it pretty low? Like think about how many times that you're getting Sonic or, like going to McDonald's because you're in a rush and there's nothing wrong with eating that food. But if the majority of your diet is takeout and you don't remember the last time you actually made a home cooked meal, you probably have that's a problem.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Cause that's, I think, what the root cause is for a lot of those things. And then sometimes it's, hereditary and just, there's things that just happen. Okay. So you kind of talked about it. We talked about, beef, but now do you work with strictly beef in your job, or do you work doing you do pork too?
So I do pretty much everything except for in my job. I do everything except for seafood. That's a totally different category. That's FDA. I cover pretty much everything that's USDA. So beef, poultry, primarily pork and some
Okay.
pork.
Now, do you ever go to the farms to see where they're being raised?
So with some of our producers, especially in chicken, in poultry producers, a lot of those large companies will own and in some large beef, but in some pork. But primarily in my job right now, in my role, there are some companies that own the egg all the way to the actual like chicken breast, the actual like meat item. And so they are like a completely vertically integrated, right? Where they own everything and all the processes, all the barns, all things like that. In those situations, one of my customers, I'm thinking of the top of my head, like where they're processing and turning, like they make turkey, it's a turkey production, and they make turkey patties or burgers that would go to like, you would find at like Costco or whatever. And they are also a slaughter facility. Most places are just like further processed, like where there's processed foods. Processed meats is anything, the definition of process means taking anything from its original form. So from an actual hanging carcass, even if ground beef is considered a processed meat, even though it's just taking a muscle and grinding it, we are taking it from its original form and processing it. Or further process things like hot dogs, deli meats, meatballs, things like that, further processed. So I typically work with most people in the kind of the further processed category, especially because that's when we start adding in functional ingredients and things like that to make those products a product, right? Like when you open up a cow, Slim Jims don't pop out at you. We have to find some ways to make that, that product. That's where I come in.
That's where you work at. Okay, cool. All right, and since you mentioned it, yeah, I think the word process in general, I try to like not catch myself when I say it.
Sure.
Sometimes it's like, yeah, like processing could literally, yeah, when you cook something, you're processing it. It doesn't make it inherently bad for you. However, I mean, you've read, there've been articles and headlines about processed meats causing cancer. And so where do you kind of draw the line in the sand, and like how do you explain that to your clients about like consumption of those things like bacon, the things that are further processed, like bacon, hot dogs, maybe like frozen patties with like a lot of extra fillers and stuff like that?
Sure. And so a lot of things when we also there are standards of identity for every single item that is out there. And like the word filler example, we can't really put things that aren't declared on a label. So anytime you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to eat a hot dog, like who knows what's in there? Everything is listed on the label. It's skeletal muscle. The same thing that's in your steak is just ground up and put into a hot dog. So there's nothing crazy in there. And so for me, like a lot of the research that's come out by the World Health Organization, saying that processed meats and red meat specifically are contributing to cancer. There are a ton of observational studies, right, where they sent out a big survey and they said, I want you to write down the things that you've eaten in the last 30 days. And they saw that some of these people who have cancer have also eaten processed meats. It's one of those things that correlation doesn't equal causation. Like just because you've had processed meats in your life doesn't mean that's what's attributing to cancer. As well as how many people who aren't regularly logging their foods can you recall what you had 30 days ago? There's also a lot of data that was showing that people were underreporting their calories and underreporting like what I'm using air quotes here, stereotypical bad foods. I don't believe in bad foods, but the people who believe, and they were over-reporting vegetables when we know a lot of people will just do that. People will tell you they're eating 1,200 calories and they're definitely not. And so there's a lot of error in the studies, as well as typically people who primarily are eating lots of processed meats are also just eating too much calorically in general.
Right.
So you also have to understand that if you're eating a ton of processed meats, you're also probably eating mostly fast food, like lots of burgers, dietary fiber is low. So we have to kind of look at the whole picture here, and we say, okay, if I'm having bacon with my breakfast, that is also maybe like a bunch of vegetables, maybe some eggs or egg whites, and some fruit, maybe an English muffin, it's probably not really a big issue. If you're having bacon, prime rib, mac and cheese, loaded baked potatoes, brownie sundae, like the problem really isn't the processed meat. The problem in and of itself is that we are over consuming calories, leading to issues of, type 2 diabetes, potentially colorectal cancers and things like that because of total overconsumption of calories and total overconsumption of, not very nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I completely agree with you. So what happens now? So on the opposite of processed, we have a label that says natural. What does that mean?
So the phrase natural, that's another thing that kind of gets me going, is there is no standard of identity for natural besides minimally processed. And like we kind of have said, the word processing is taking anything from its original form and changing it. So you'll see on a label like all natural hot dog, or for my favorite is all natural turkey bacon. Turkey bacon is probably the most processed meat product because if you think about it, taking pork and making it into bacon is very minimal. It's literally just in like smoking a pork belly, usually maybe injecting it with some solution of water, salt. I was combining
a new word.
Yeah, salt, water, and usually a sodium phosphate, which is derived of phosphorus. And smoking it, right, and slicing. So very minimally processed. Where when we make turkey bacon, we have to like take different parts of the turkey, form it into a form, make it be super long, slice it, smoke. It is a way more intensive process, yet we can still label it as natural. So you can pretty much label like I'm naturally existing here on this earth. Like it's a very subjective phrase. The word organic, that's very different. That means the animal's mother had to be organic. When it was born, had to be organic. The paint of its environment has to be organic in case they ingest, if they chew on the rail, everything they do has to be organic. There has been tons and tons of research and data that shows there is no nutrient difference between organic and non-organic. It is actually way worse for the environment because you're producing 30% less either meat or veg produce with the same amount of land and more resources. So it's not better for the environment, and there's no nutritional difference. But in terms of the actual definition of the term organic, there are agencies that things have to pass through to have the organic stamp on there. There's also made with organic ingredients, which is 70% organic. There's organic, which is 95% organic, and 100% organic, which is 100% organic. So even within organic, there's sub-tiers. But it is a very rigorous process to become organic. But the natural thing is a bunch of crap. And again, it's increasing the price for items that are what would be conventional, right? Like, for example, in the United States, we are not allowed, no matter what, to use any sort of hormones in pork or poultry. And you'll see hormone-free poultry, right, on all these packages. And we have to remind ourselves, like, no one can use hormones in poultry. We did tons of research to show that hormones had no effect on the growth rates of these chickens. So it was not incentivized by the producer to use hormones to begin with.
Right.
So we don't use hormones in poultry. And then people were like, well, then how are our chickens so big? And I was like, let's think about it this way. If you take a 7-foot basketball player and have that basketball player have a child with another 7-foot basketball player, you're probably going to have a very large child. And so if we can take our best breeding stock and continuously breed them, we're going to create very large chickens.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
Through, really good genetics, not hormones or, whatever people are thinking that we're doing. Yeah. So, and we're also, the way that we're raising the chickens, we are making sure that you can monitor their food intake, their water intake. We're having lower mortality rates. So they're not being attacked by other chickens. So we're able to make sure they are safer and can grow larger.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, I had like 2 thoughts just now, but I think we need to go with this one that I have, which is, because because people have been asking me to do a review of all the documentaries on Netflix, like with the health and
Game Changers
and all that. And like I've mentioned it, but like I kind of refused because I watched What's the Health one time and was literally had anxiety. Everything was cringing. I like vibes coming out of my ears and my face for like 3 days. Like it took me time to get over that. So I almost don't even want to I know it's like, I feel like it's my responsibility as a registered dietitian. Like I should do it, but like, I don't even want to give it my attention because it's like that ridiculous to me.
Right. Yeah.
I would love to hear how you could maybe let's just explain some of those. I remember watching some, they'll show video of like certain farms and like interview families and like all this stuff that is just like insane to me.
Sure.
But could you maybe just explain like how a documentary could be so profound like that, and like maybe where are they recording these farms or something?
Sure. So the thing that's really sad in a lot of these documentaries is if you think about like farm workers, they are primarily immigrants, like low income, like minimum wage type people. And if a big company comes in and says, you know what, I will pay you 10 grand or whatever for you to do this or to do XYZ. They will do it, and it's horrible, but like those people will do horrible things. And that's kind of what it comes down to. There have been tons of like fake exposés that come out about animal agriculture. And once you get down to the bottom of it, it's always found that there was just kind of like one, bad workers, or two, people were paid because everyone has some sort of alternate agenda. Because at the end of the day, abusing an animal or doing anything wrong to an animal is losing money to the producer. The producer wants all those animals to stay alive and wants them to yield very well, because for an animal to be slaughtered at the slaughter facility, it cannot be diseased, dead, down, or disabled.
Right.
So if there's any of those things happening, the animal can't be slaughtered, and that's a huge waste to the producer. Like think about how much each animal costs, then it's not, he's not getting paid for. So it is in their best interest to make sure all those animals are extremely healthy and have no diseases. So you will not see any farmer going out of its way to abuse or hurt or neglect animals, because every dead animal is a big loss of money.
Right.
So where's the incentive is like their genuine question.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful angle that I think when we're just like thrown these messages, we have to remember to like take ourselves out of that and like ask yourself, I think that's a great question. Like, what's the agenda? Like,
right.
You have your best interest at heart, or are they just trying to make money? Which is so sad, because then it's like, then I think about why some people will, get skeptical about someone like us. We like genuinely just want to give you the right information, the right tools. Yes. Like we want you to stop living in fear of food and just be healthy, like in your own way, whatever that is.
Right.
And then like they become skeptical people like us when we're like, no, we're not that. We are not that. Like,
right. Because think about it. Like think of people like Herbalife or these supplement companies, or they're saying like, all you have to do is drink this tea and like you'll lose weight, or like buy this waist trainer. And like we're over here like, how about you just eat some vegetables and get more sleep?
And eat protein.
And eat some protein, right? And integrate some like lean protein into your life, and they're like, wait, I can have a cookie sometimes? And you're like, yeah, you can have a cookie sometimes. Like, I hope you have cookies sometimes.
Yeah.
And they don't believe us because of, all these things that they've been fed their whole life, and seeing things through a certain lens, right? And so we have to kind of be that voice of reason to remind people that when you see all this food that with these labels, and like what those labels mean truly, like for like that natural, no real standard of identity, right? All poultry and pork is hormone free. All meat in general, regardless if they've been administered hormones, beef specifically is hormone free, because we test for that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And same thing with antibiotic free. While we give animals antibiotics, would you want to see an animal suffering that could be treated with antibiotics, or just not give it to them? Like, would you not give your dog antibiotics if it had an eye infection? No, you would give that to your animal, right? And so we have to remind ourselves, like, we want to treat these animals that are sick if they ever, for whatever reason, get sick. And again, understanding that everything we administer to an animal is highly regulated and has a withdrawal period and gets tested, once it's in meat, once it's like a carcass or a meat product, for any sort of residues. And if it has antibiotic residue, that whole carcass gets pulled. So it doesn't go into the human food supply.
Totally.
So this whole fear mongering is really sad, because at the end of the day, roughly 2% of the population is directly involved in agriculture itself, right? And so because we're so far removed, like I live in Chicago, you live in New York, like we're not like growing up on a farm anymore. We don't have to raise our food. We have Trader Joe's, Walmart, these kinds of stores where we can just go get food that we don't have to raise ourselves. And so everyone can come up with these ideas of what they think a farm looks like when they've never been to a farm. They don't know what it's like to feed 9 billion people. They don't know what we need to do, when like the people who are pumping out all this labeling and marketing claim is some big hotshot sitting in a high rise who, like I said, has never even been to any sort of agriculture, has no agriculture background, when they don't even really know what's best for the animals. So who are we, these people who aren't actually raising the animals, to say like that's how an animal needs to get raised, when you have no background in animal welfare or how to raise food to feed the world?
Yeah. Oh, so great. I know we're both on a time crunch, so we're going to wrap up in a bit, but I hope everybody listening re-listens to this episode, because I think at the same time, it's like, I feel like most people are listening to this and they're just like mind blown. And I admit this all of the time. I still have to check myself, because even I get influenced because I am far removed, and like there's just so much stuff. And even as a nutrition expert who stays up to date with this stuff, like I was so happy we're coming on, because sometimes it's like you get so caught up in just like you almost like don't know how to trust yourself. It's crazy. It's so crazy.
It's for sure. And like even like when I was going like in school, like studying nutrition as an RD, they don't really teach you about agriculture or how the food is raised, right? So we know all this stuff like so in detail about like how like digestion works and how our bodies work and like how food works in our bodies, but like we don't necessarily learn where the food comes from. And that's where my background is so, I think, interesting, because I have a best of both worlds of understanding how food works in our bodies and how we actually make and develop foods, and how we use these ingredients that go into meat products to actually be safe. Like everyone's like, oh, like chemicals, like when everything is a chemical, and so at the end of the day, we have to remind ourselves, like, just because we don't understand the name of something doesn't make it bad, because it's always about the dose makes the poison, right? You could, like, water can be lethal, right? If you drink too much water, you can die. Just like when I tell people like dihydrogen monoxide sounds super scary, like, oh my God, I know that it's a chemical, I probably wouldn't eat something that has dihydrogen monoxide. And I tell them like dihydrogen, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, H2O. And they're like, oh. So we have to sometimes self-check ourselves to be like, man, I really don't know what these chemicals are. I shouldn't be scared of them just because I don't know. Because I'm sure like something like ascorbic acid or these things are kind of scary. And then you're like, oh, that's vitamin C. Like, yeah, that's scary. And so we have to sometimes do our own little self-check and be like, oh, maybe I was just being a little bit entitled.
Yeah. And honestly, as we're this whole conversation, I'm just thinking like, it is an entitlement. Like if you're worried about this stuff, you need to check yourself. If you're worried about this stuff, like you are a very privileged person and you should be very happy.
Right, because
you
think
express
about it.
gratitude every day, because this means that you have enough money, enough fortune to actually make this a problem in your world.
Right, because think about it, if you're starving in Africa, you don't care what is
So seriously,
you
like,
have to stay alive.
I was just like, I'm like, can we make this a different conversation? Because that's my whole time, the back of my head, I'm just thinking like, wow, how privileged. Wow. Right.
Like we are so privileged. And then you have to start thinking about these people in Africa, like all these anti-GMO people. It's like, oh, GMOs are bad. GMOs, bad. When we have amazing things like golden rice, which is high vitamin A rice that saved the lives of thousands of people in Africa because they were so vitamin A deficient, they were dying.
Wow.
So we engineered this rice to have more vitamin A that saved lives.
Wow.
So if you're going to come tell me the science that it took to save lives is bad, you are entitled.
Oh my God, this is so good. I don't want to stop. Okay, well, we have to stop, but thank you so much for coming on. Is there any last minute things that you want to share? And then if not, just tell people where they can find you.
No, I mean, if I'm always open for conversation, dialogue, questions. Anytime anyone is like, hey, I don't know what this chemical is or what's in my food, or can you explain like what this means? I get tons of DMs, just general questions about food processing. So I love getting DMs, emails, questions about that. And I do have a link that I can send to you that has like some research that I published about beef, as well as like a beef sustainability fact sheet. And so like if anyone wants to download that, I can send you the links to those. It's kind of just good, easy like guides to kind of understand some like labeling and things about how beef is sustainable. As well as you can always find me on Instagram. I am Liviron, LIVIRON_RD, as well as on my website, which is revival, REVIVALWN.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I will put those in the show notes for sure. All right, guys, you heard it. Please don't be afraid of eating meat now. Please. Also, don't forget your veggies, right? It's all about balance, but don't be afraid of eating meat. If you have any questions for me or Livy, definitely reach out. If you're not already subscribed to the Tips with Tony podcast, please subscribe. It allows other people to find the podcast, but more importantly, it notifies you every Monday and every Wednesday when a new episode comes out. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.